and that team is Ole Miss. And I think the veteran experience may be the reason that Ole Miss escaped Baton Rouge. You've heard the number a lot this year, Borky. You and I were talking about this earlier today. Ole Miss has 7 1,000-point scorers on its team. And some of those are guys that have transferred in and have scored a bunch of those points elsewhere. I don't think getting caught up in how many points guys have scored is all that important, but I do think it illustrates an important point, and that is collectively, this team has played a lot of college basketball. You got a couple of fifth-year guys in Morrell and Brakefield. You got guys that have, Padula, who's played a bunch of ACC basketball when it was better than it is this year. Dre Davis feels like he is really emerging. He is the reason that Ole Miss was able to come from behind and win on Saturday night in Baton Rouge. Borky, the Rebels were dominated for 90% of that game.
36 minutes, LSU was for 36 minutes. LSU was better than them, and especially in the first half. I think LSU had 7 offensive rebounds in the first half. Malik Dia was played off the floor. Both of Ole Miss's quote unquote bigs were played off the floor. I think Dia played 16 minutes and Brown Jones played 6. Right? Yeah. So both of their bigs were played off the floor. LSU took it to them physically. And it was also a game that was officiated in a way that allowed LSU to be physical, which, hey, I thought it was an evenly called game. So the refs didn't cause anything. They just they had a looser whistle, which benefited LSU in that case. I think Ole Miss would be at their best with a lighter whistle because a team like LSU can kind of physically take it to them like they did on Saturday night. And for 36 minutes, Ole Miss really didn't match that. Again, the bigs got played off the floor. Sean Padula was 1 of 7 from inside the arc. They didn't get anything from Murray. They couldn't get much from Morrell, and that's going to be, with his injury, some nights you're just not going to be able to get Matt Morrell at his best because he is injured, not hurt, and playing through it.
There seems to be a fair amount of tread off the tires. At this point.
But he had 9 boards.
A lot. Nobody in the history of Ole Miss basketball has played more games in a Rebels jersey than Matt Morrell.
Every minute they get out of him is almost a miracle. I mean, toughness personified. I don't know how he's still playing basketball. And then he got 9 boards in the game. But so they were outplayed. They didn't play well. They didn't shoot well. They missed 9 free throws. They were outplayed.
All right, so pause for a second. I got a question for you. If you watched that game and had not looked at the box score, would you believe it if I told you that the actual numbers, Ole Miss ended the game with more offensive rebounds and was only out-rebounded in total by 1 by LSU, based on watching the game without looking at a box score?
Without looking at it, no, you wouldn't believe it. But what was it, 6 offensive rebounds in the final 3 minutes of the game for Ole Miss? And I mean, that was the difference, right? You mentioned the veteran team. Ole Miss was getting outplayed, but they never panicked. And once the game got tight, Ole Miss is down 11 with 3 minutes to go with the basketball, and LSU just kind of let the door open a little bit, and then Ole Miss was able to kick that door open and apply pressure, and LSU was the one that faltered, and Ole Miss put the pressure on, and they were the ones that executed. Davis was exceptional on the offensive glass. Brakefield makes a big shot. That was the difference, is Ole Miss did not panic in the clutch, and LSU did, and they stole a win that you can say they quote-unquote didn't deserve it. They stole a win because they were the ones that made the plays and didn't panic, and LSU were the ones that did not make the plays, and they panicked because of the pressure that Ole Miss put on them. They couldn't handle it, and they blew it at home.
3 minutes and 15 seconds remaining. Cam Carter makes a layup for LSU to make it 70-59. And if you turned it off at that point, you can be forgiven. Didn't feel like there was any reason to keep watching. Matthew Morrell goes to the free throw line with 2:52, and he makes them both to make it a 9-point game. Jamin Brakefield with 2:04 left makes a pair of free throws to make it a 7-point game. Brakefield makes a layup with 1:44 left to make it a 5-point game. A pair of free throws from Sean Padula makes it a 3-point game with 1:29 to go. Brakefield hits a 3 to tie the game at 70 on an assist from Matt Morrell with 45 seconds remaining. And then Ole Miss gets a defensive stop. They get the ball. They get the final shot. Really well-designed play where Murray goes to his right. Padula takes kind of a handoff, goes hard to the rim. Really is a shot he needs to make, but he missed it. And you had Dre Davis there for the tip-in. What a stupid call, by the way. Like,
yeah,
awful.
I mean, and don't make the basket watch the play. Was the ball outside the basket? Clearly it was. Dre Davis tips it back in, and Ole Miss escapes with a 72-70 win. And some of what Chris Beard said after the game, he said, look, good teams find ways to win where they've got their backs against the wall late.
Yeah.
And Ole Miss squarely had its back against the wall. And look, they didn't play a perfect final 3 minutes of the game. There were a bunch of missed shots in there.
Yeah. But they got the offensive rebounds is really what saved them there. And contrast that to a couple weeks ago, right? That it made Haydad laugh every time. Ole Miss against Texas A&M, they were up 8 with 1:52 left, and they vomited all over themselves, and they lose that. See, it gets them every time.
It makes me laugh.
And they lost that game. And that was kind of a theme going into that game, too, is, they forced overtime in Starkville, but they got beaten overtime. And even the Alabama win, which is an incredible win in hindsight, by the way. They have a win on the road against the number 1 team in the country. That's
just pretty incredible in real time.
That's as good a win. I mean, that's as good a win as anybody has in the country.
You could argue that's the best win in college basketball.
It is, yeah.
But even the last few minutes of that game, if not for Brakefield with ice in his veins making 6 free throws, that game got weird too. And so they were having trouble closing games. And then the A&M thing happens, and it's a disaster. And then what have they done after that? Texas is a close game. Ole Miss made the plays down the stretch to beat Texas, right? That was a really back-and-forth close game. Ole Miss made the plays late, right? They go to Missouri. They were never really in the chance for the clutch. They just got beat by a really good team that day. But Auburn, they got beat, but they played well, right? Kentucky goes on this big run early in the second half. All kinds of pressure on Ole Miss. The air is sucked out of the arena, and what do? There's calm, and then they extended that lead again. They didn't panic after Kentucky went on that long run.
And you know what the lesson in that is? Always good to be up 27.
Always good to be up 27. That certainly helps you. But when Kentucky goes on this run, Ole Miss didn't panic. They just played, and they won the game. And then on Saturday night in Baton Rouge, they were outplayed for a long period of time, but they didn't panic. And as a result, LSU did, and they won the game. You're seeing an evolution of what they're able to do in the clutch since they were bad at it just a couple of weeks ago.
And I take nothing away from Ole Miss. They played really well down the stretch. But talk about throwing up on yourself. That's what LSU did. LSU would have been completely justified in firing Matt McMahon Sunday morning. I mean, he's probably going to get canned anyway because that team in 3 years has gone nowhere under him. I feel like State and Florida dodged big bullets going with the guys they went with instead of Matt McMahon. But
because he was in that group of 3.
He was absolutely in that group. But man, what you can play as well as you want to play. If you're down 11 at the 3-minute mark, you cannot win the game unless the other team makes big mistakes. And LSU did everything wrong in those final 3 minutes.
We talked about that when Ole Miss won out of Alabama.
Yeah.
Up 8, 1:30 to go. If you make free throws and do not turn over the basketball, it is not possible for the other team to win. If you make your free throws and you don't turn it over. Like, time just doesn't work in a 3-possession game because you're able to keep extending the lead.